Welcome to summer solstice, 21st of June 2025. It's the longest day of the year, no less. I'm sure you guessed that anyway. And people often ask, why was sun cult worship so important? Well, I would have thought it was self-explanatory, really, but evidently not, some people. For whatever reason, known only to themselves, I would say. I mean, to me, it's completely logical and rational. So, think of the fundamental science of it. Nothing on Earth can survive without sunshine. Nothing can grow, as far as we know, that is. We certainly can't survive without it. And so, tens of thousands of years ago, possibly even longer, our ancestors, whatever part of this planet they actually lived on, they started to worship the sun. It became a formalized, ritualized tradition each year. And they knew exactly when the summer solstice would be and the winter solstice. And then they started to build monuments like Stonehenge. Yes, and they started to make petroglyph inscriptions like the ones we see at Tarnum in Sweden. But long before that, our ancestors actually practiced the sun cult worship because everything for them depended, much more so than hers. It does for us to this day. Everything still does depend on the sun for us. But for them, it was far more raw and fundamental and essential. If the crops failed, there was no supermarket to go to and buy reserves from another part of the world. And there were no pesticides in those days. And obviously for many millennia, our ancestors were hunter-gatherers before they became settled farmers, planting grains in particular, all of which depend on sunshine. And so sun cult worship really became the most important ritual of the entire year, the summer sunset. The other rituals, such as Harvest Festival, spring, the rise of spring and the beginning, the birth of spring, and also the winter nights and the winter sunset were also fundamentally important. But the summer solstice was especially important because it was the high mark of the sun, what they called, our Saxon ancestors called, the sunstead, when the sun was at its highest point in summer or at its lowest point in winter, the winter sunstead. And so here we are on the longest day of the year, and from tomorrow the nights start drawing in incrementally. It'll take probably about 2 weeks for you to notice the difference of a few minutes. So imagine how it was for our ancestors. They lived with this. There was no street lighting. Apart from some of the larger, well, I guess you could say, the very first cities, everything would have been in darkness. Whatever light they had was at a minimum. And of course, everyone was predating upon each other back in those days. And so, absolute tribal security and family security was paramount. So just imagine a time when there's no light pollution at night time and the skies are clear and it's star-studded and you can actually see the Milky Way, over in the south. It's just amazing. I mean, I've been in some dark side zones photographing the galactic core. When you're lucky enough to find it, a dark site that is, and there are not many of them left in this country. And so think about how it would have been as night follows that day on the summer solstice, knowing that they were then marching irrevocably towards the winter solstice when it would be dark early, let's say 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and it would be a very long night, and in those days the mind ran riot, much more so than today. But their sixth sense was vastly more developed than what ours is today, because the problem with modernity is we've largely divorced nature, everything around us. I mean, look at the beautiful scenery. The sun is setting, well, not just yet, but will be soon over there in the west, and I'll try and film it later as it's going down. Just imagine how it would be in a more primordial time when there was no street lighting, no supermarkets, nothing that smacks of modernity, no planes in the sky, just the firmament above, and the trees and the forest and wild animals, because obviously in this country, you know, we've killed off most of our wild animals. Imagine what it must have been like to them, for them, and that at that time. And so I guess when you put it into that context, it explains far better the whole purpose of sun cult worship, or what the Germanic tribes called Suna, or Sunna, Sol, and or Sol Invictus, you know, a sun cult tribe, and what they call a sun cult cult, which is bizarre. But the problem with the Abrahamic religions is that they try to divorce people. They try to drag people away from their innate worship, which predates this rather new and infantile perception of the world. Most of it, in my opinion, is rooted in a fairy tale and has no basis in science, absolutely. Because if you think of the summer solstice, it is most definitely rooted in scientific, fundamental and basic scientific fact, because without the sun, we do not exist. Nothing on this earth will exist without the sun. And that is why sun cult worship is the oldest spiritual, perhaps you could say religious ritual known to humanity. And it endures to this day with people like me, a pagan, who still practice sun cult worship. And we do so for the reasons that I've set out previously in this video. Without the sun, we're nothing. We don't exist. The sun is mighty, but the sun can also destroy us. Solar flares from the sun, we all know what they do to communications on Earth and how they can tilt the Earth's axis. And obviously, too much sun is deadly. And also, a particularly hot summer will burn up resources, you know, pretty much incinerate crops in the field, which is terrible when you need to eat, and also deplete water reserves. So the sun can also be highly destructive, but it can also be highly beneficial. In fact, it is the most beneficial energy source on this earth in our entire solar system, because without it, there is not that essential universal battery, for want of a better description, to power our solar system and everything else on this earth, including us. And so this is why our ancestors worshipped the sun. This is why it became the very first spiritual, religious worship ritual. And it continues to this day, as I said, and people across the world will be worshipping the sun. And people should show the absolute respect for the sun. And for all the reasons that I've stipulated in the foregoing minutes of this video. Without the sun, what do we have? We have perpetual darkness. You know, pretty much just like the moon. Barren, bereft of life. Perhaps some deep, bored, microscopic life that has survived, but nothing along the lines of what we know today. The trees around us can't survive without the sun. The grass, the crops, the flowers, everything depends on the sun. And the sun, of course, makes us feel much better. So when you see in these articles in the press sometimes, which I don't read, but I remember the days when I did, many decades ago, and they talked about sun worshippers. Well, that's where the term sun worship comes from. You know, they worship the sun. I remember a woman when I lived in Eastbourne, and I mistook her for an Asian woman with blonde hair and blue eyes because she was so heavily tanned and deeply wrinkled and lined. I actually thought she was from the Indian subcontinent, but she wasn't. She was a sun worshipper. And she was a very nice person, but she had totally and utterly committed herself to the worship of the sun. And I don't know if she's still alive. I've not lived there for a few years. But that is the extreme to which it can be taken. I mean, I'm not the sunbathing type. I never have been, quite frankly. I've been burned 2 or 3 times, you know, quite seriously in the past, particularly in Mallorca, when I first went abroad at 13 years old. And I learned a very severe lesson then. I've never been in a hurry to repeat it. And I've had a couple of more, one in Sherwood Forest and another one at Holywell at Eastbourne. And I've no desire to repeat those either. I wear minimal clothing when it's hot, but I do my best to avoid getting sunburn. Because whilst everything on earth does depend on the sun, likewise, being burnt to a crisp by the sun is not something I would recommend to anyone. Everything in moderation, quite frankly, in my opinion, wherever possible. It's not always possible, but absolutely. I mean, I always feel, I could have put it, full of hope. It's almost like a semi-cataclysmic moment, in my opinion, the summer sunstead, because the sun is at its highest point, and you know it's at its highest point, and it's the longest day of the year, but you also know that the sun now is bound to fall into darkness and then to rise again at the winter solstice or after the winter solstice. And the never-ending perpetual cycle of life and death and rebirth is what the solstices are all about, in actual fact. I particularly like just coming out in the countryside on a summer solstice. Years ago I used to worship with other groups, and we'd burn the sun cross, the sun wheel, etc. Well, the grass behind me is just so arid and dry, it's not safe to put a sun cross on a pole and burn it, because the entire field would go up, quite frankly. And these days I prefer to worship alone. And many people have asked me, you know, what sun cult worship is about. Well, it's about what I've explained. To my mind, that's my perception of it. I'm sure other people will perceive it in the same way or a similar way or in a completely different way. Everybody's got a different angle on things, quite frankly. But this is my angle, and people have asked me, and many people on the channel have asked me to make a video about the summer solstice. And so instead of trying to bedazzle you with the usual fireworks of burning a sun cross on a pole, etc., and dancing around it drunk and feasting, which is what a lot of people do, instead I decided to do this and to explain it to you, because quite frankly I'm not into that anymore. I did used to be a long time ago, but now I just prefer to sit peacefully in the countryside, you know, to be sedate and to absorb the passing world. And on a summer sunstead, you know that it's going to be a very long day, and morning will break, you know, very quickly, and then after that it's the slow descent into darkness, only for the sun goddess to be reborn again. It's a cycle which will outlast us probably by billions of years. It's nothing that we need to worry about in this mortal coil. All we need to do, in my opinion, is make the most of it and bathe in the summer solstice. Worship the sun, but don't become burnt to a crisp by it.